Karma Yoga. And we'll start with the chant. Protected together. May we be nourished together. May we acquire strength together. May our learning shine forth in our lives. May we not find fault with one another. Om, peace, peace, peace. So let us remind ourselves where we are. We are, of course, right here in Los Angeles, but relating to our study, we are sitting with Swami Vivekananda in his quarters at 228 West 39th Street in New York City, and the date is Friday, December 20, 1895. It's the morning class. We don't know exactly what time, but it's in one of those brownstones that they all look alike, all lined up on the street, and we climb up a flight of steps to get to the, or possibly two flights of steps, to get to his quarters, which are two rooms connected to one another, and the rooms are full of people from all walks of life who have come to hear an illumined sage talk about spiritual life and how to work. What is the secret of work? This is the second of the second class for advanced students. And of course, the title given now is The Secret of Work. Probably at that time it was just class number 2 for the advanced students. And we're reading from what's as close to the original transcript of the classes as we can get, which is Sturdy's unauthorized edition of Karma Yoga, published in England. We had already gone through, I think, 2 or 3 classes, with 2 or 3 sessions of studying this particular class, The Secret of Work. And what is the secret of work? What finally does Swami Vivekananda find is the secret of work? So he takes it through several steps. And first he discusses how can we actually help another. Just as a reminder, how can we help another? And he gives gradations of kinds of help that we can give. Physical help being the lowest, intellectual help being higher, but the highest help we can give is spiritual help because it solves our problems forever. Actually, the only solution to the problem of suffering, of misery in life, is the spiritual solution. To know who we really are, to find that mind of infinite bliss which is within us. So, and then he points out that work produces both good and evil effects. No work is entirely without any defect, and no work is entirely without any good thing also. That work has its effect also on us. So how do we get out of that chain which work is putting on us by binding us to that? And he says non-attachment. However, it's very difficult. So we go from lower truth to higher truth. We go from good actions. We transcend wicked actions by doing good actions, and we form our character that way. And then we have to go beyond that as well. So Swamiji then introduces the idea of a desire for freedom. This is when we start to really transform work into spiritual practice, when behind it there is a desire for freedom, a desire for liberation. Without that desire, work remains work. How to turn work into yoga? There has to be behind it a motivation for freedom, for enlightenment, for knowing God, We're actually doing work as spiritual practice. Mostly we do work because we want the results of the work, whether it's a job that we want the money, or we want some name and fame, or we want the results. I'm helping someone and I want to see that person helped. And maybe that person is not getting helped, even with my best efforts. Then that I'm not doing it with the desire for liberation, for spiritual progress. I'm doing it with the desire to help someone, thinking that I can help someone, which Swamiji points out actually is in the highest sense not possible. We help ourselves. So he asks us to work not as slaves to our mind, as slaves to our desires, but as masters of our own minds. And when we can do that, we work through freedom, which he equates with love. And then we had this big discussion of love and how any act which is loving, every act of love brings happiness, not misery. And if we do something that we feel we are doing out of love, and yet it brings us tremendous misery, or if it brings us misery, if it brings us pain, if it brings us suffering, then Swamiji says this is a test. It wasn't pure love. It wasn't that highest love which is all-embracing and without any taint of selfishness, without any taint of expectation, without any jealousy attached to it. So when we can love everyone, including our near and dear ones, our spouses, our parents, our children, our relatives, our friends, with that kind of love, with no reaction, then we are fit, says Vivekananda, to be unattached. So he always sets the bar very high, and that is wonderful, because then we have something to strive for. He doesn't say it's going to be easy, but he points it out. But I think this is wonderful, and I'm not sure if it's unique to his complete works, but where he, towards the end of our last class, we read how he equates Sat-Chit Ananda, not only with, usually he equates it with existence, knowledge, and bliss, or existence, consciousness, and bliss. But here, he equates that bliss with love. So that the very nature of reality, the very nature of the supreme reality is not only bliss, but in other words, it is love. Let me read that portion again. These three are eternally connected, these three in one: real existence, real knowledge, and real love. Where one is, the others must be. They are the three aspects of the one thing. Though Brahman, the absolute reality, is not a thing, but here in the course of this explanation, existence, knowledge, and bliss. So that the existence which is the absolute reality becomes a relative existence, which we see in this world. And the knowledge, which is the supreme knowledge or the absolute consciousness, which is Brahman, which is our true nature, that becomes knowledge of the world that we see. And bliss, Ananda, the reality of the bliss which is our own true nature, the absolute reality, becomes love in the world. That we know, he says. So here he equates the Ananda facet of Brahman as not only as bliss, but as love. And then he describes this last sentence here: when you have succeeded in loving your husband, your wife, your children, the whole world, your universe, in such a manner that there is no reaction of pain or jealousy, no selfish feeling, then you are in a fit state to be unattached. So this much we read last time. Now, Swami Vivekananda is going to turn to the Gita chapter. He's going to quote from the Gita, and this is a very interesting quote because, let me read his quote. He says, Krishna says, "Look at me, Arjuna. If I stop from work for one moment, the whole universe will die. Yet I have nothing to gain from the universe. I am one Lord. I have nothing to gain from the universe. But why do I work? Because I love the world. This is very interesting because let's look at those verses. He's referring to, in chapter 3, there are 3 verses. This is actually a nice little book, by the by. Bhagavad Gita as viewed by Swami Vivekananda. One of our monks, I believe it is Swami Madhurananda, has gone through, yes, he has gone through the entire complete works of Swami Vivekananda. And everywhere he refers to a particular Gita verse, he puts that quote in this book. So there are some, so this portion is also referred to here. So the 3 verses in question, it's in chapter 3, verses 22 to 24. Name parthasti kartavyam trishu lokeshu kinchana nana vaptam avaptavyam varta eva cha karmani yadi hyaham na varteyam jatu karmanya tandrita mama vartmanu vartante manushya partha sarvashah Utside yurime lokana kuryam karma chedaham sankarasya cha kartasyam upahanyami ma praja. Alright, let me read the translation. I have, O Partha, O Arjuna. This is Krishna talking to Arjuna in chapter 3, which is the yoga of work. I have no duty, nothing that I have not gained, and nothing that I have yet to gain in the 3 worlds. Yet I do continue in action. The idea that he has nothing to gain, he has nothing to seek, there's no reason for him to work. And yet he continues in action. Why? If ever I did not continue to work without any relaxation, O Partha, men and women would in every way follow my example. If I did not do work, these worlds would perish. I would be the cause of social disruption, and I would also be ruining these people. So here we find nowhere exactly does Sri Krishna say in the Gita, if you translate it, this Sanskrit literally, he doesn't say because I love the world. This seems to be Swami Vivekananda's, perhaps his creative expansion or intuition that why would, because he would not, of course Sri Krishna would not want to ruin these people, he would not want to cause social disruption, he would not want to cause people any suffering. Why? Because he loves them, because the very nature of God is love. So it's perhaps a kind of creative interpretation of these verses that this, because I love the world. It sounds actually also, it's biblical in the Bible. God so loved the world. It will be very familiar for his listeners who are New Yorkers of the 1890s, mostly steeped in the Bible. So here, Swamiji is going to emphasize this principle of love in bringing non-attachment. In other places, he touches on other aspects of it. Let me read a little more what his commentary is on this. God is unattached because he loves. That real love makes us unattached. Here he's giving the secret in this particular. We have in other places, how do we get unattachment? How do we get detachment? By practicing viveka, discernment. We discern, we look at the defects of being attached. We look how our attachment binds us, how it makes us miserable, and gradually detachment comes. Or we look at how work binds us, how it, on the one hand, it stirs up tendencies within us, it gives us habits, perhaps bad habits, and we get attached to the results. So thinking deeply about that, detachment arises. But here, you bring it to a higher level, or a very appealing level of love. God is unattached because he loves. That real love makes us unattached. Wherever there is this attachment, this tremendous clinging, you must know it is physical, a sort of physical attraction between particles of matter and other particles of matter. Something that attracts two bodies nearer and nearer all the time. And if they cannot get near, it becomes painful. But where there is real love, it does not count on physical attachment at all. Okay. Swami Vivekananda it's clear. I think it's clear, isn't it? That this idea that attachment is one thing and love is another. When we have attachment, it's based in our physical nature. This attachment of attraction of matter for matter. I love this phone. It's my phone. It's a thing. This thing is one thing and that thing is another. And if these two become separated, I become distressed. However, in true love, actually there is no separation, because true love is simply a reflection of the divine, and in the divine we are all one. So there is actually no separation. So Swami Vivekananda goes on to explain, that body may be 1,000 miles distant. Love is all the same. It does not die. There will never be a reaction. I'm just going to read, backing up for a moment, a couple of comments of Swami Vivekananda on those 3 verses of the Gita, just to fill out that study. What else he has said about these verses in other places, from inspired talks. Our best work is done. Our greatest influence is exerted when we are without thought of self. All great geniuses know this. Let us open ourselves to the one divine actor, and let him act, and do nothing ourselves. And then he quotes from the Gita, O Arjuna, I have no duty in the whole world, says Krishna. Be perfectly resigned, perfectly unconcerned. Then alone can you do any true work. No eyes can see the real forces. We can only see the results. Put out self, lose it, forget it. Just let God work. It is his business. We have nothing to do but stand aside and let God work. The more we go away, the more God comes in. Get rid of the little I, and let only the great I live. So here he gives us this beautiful idea. And this is also a very high ideal of Karma Yoga, that let the divine work through us. May we simply be instruments. May we be a mere tool in the hands of God, as it were. Without any duty. Know it that Sri Krishna has no duty in the whole world. Nothing to attain. Everything is completely satisfied. Yet he works. So if we also can be like that, mere tools in the hands of God. From a talk he gave on Sri Krishna, he says, work day and night. And then quote, behold, I am the Lord of the universe. I have no duty. Every duty is bondage. But I work for work's sake. If I ceased to work for a minute, there would be chaos. So do thou work without any idea of duty. He goes in his lectures from Colombo to Almora, speaking on Vedantism. Remember the passage in the Gita where Krishna says, if I remain at rest for one moment, this universe will be destroyed. If that creative energy which is working all around us, day and night, stops for a second, the whole thing falls to the ground. There never was a time when that energy did not work throughout the universe. So this is interesting. He's discussing here the nature of not how to work. He's discussing the very nature of this world, that is, and how the divine works in the world. The divine is always active. It is not that this world was created the other day, not that a God came and created the world and since that time has been sleeping, for that cannot be. The creative energy is still going on. God is eternally creating, is never at rest. So that's how in this particular talk he addresses this idea of Sri Krishna always being active, though he doesn't need anything. But in this Karma Yoga class, of course, he is proposing that Sri Krishna, why is he ever active? Because he loves. Because I love the world. And then he's suggesting this is also a model for us. Through love comes that unattachment. Through love comes that, when we attain real love, we can work without getting attached. Now, he admits, to attain this attachment is almost a life's work. Yes, it's a lifelong struggle to attain this kind of tremendous love which flows to everyone and everything without any expectation of return. But as soon as we have got to this point, we have attained the goal and become free. The bondage of nature falls down from us, and we see nature as it is. Nature forges no more chains for us. We stand entirely free and take not the results of work into consideration. Who cares what the results be, either good or bad? So now he's giving us a hint of that state of liberation. It's an interesting question if we look at Swami Vivekananda's own work, because he was tremendously active. He was constantly working, teaching in this country, and also working for the regeneration of his country, of India, for the regeneration of the masses of uneducated, suffering millions stuck in poverty and ignorance. And when things didn't go well, when things didn't where he would try to carry out certain things and face tremendous obstacles. And on the one hand, he had tremendous perseverance and tremendous patience. But now and then he would also get frustrated. He wanted to start a center in Kashmir, which he called one of the perhaps the most beautiful place on earth he has ever visited. If there was a heaven on earth, it would be Kashmir. And one of the local Indian officials there wanted to give him land to start a center. But for whatever reason, the British government, which was in control at that time, didn't approve. And so he had a frustration that this way is blocked. So even Swami Vivekananda could experience frustration in work. Though I'm sure that, on the other hand, he was able to let it go as the will of the Divine Mother. He would say, it is glorious to fight Mother. He would fight. He would fight for things, but he would always fight with Mother. Because Mother finally is the one who's doing everything from his standpoint. All right. The person who works through freedom does not care for the results. This part is a little difficult to understand. I'm not sure I understand it myself. He says, the person who works through freedom does not care for the results. The slave wants his whipping. The servant wants his pay. This is very strange. The slave wants his whipping. I'm not sure I understand that yet. So with all life, public speakers, they want a little clapping of hands, a little hissing or hooting, and without that they will die. If you put them into a corner, without it, they will die. They require it. This is work through slavery, and to expect a good thrashing now and then becomes their nature. Any thoughts? How would the slave want his thrashing? I do not believe a slave. It's difficult to understand how a slave would want a thrashing, at least the kind of slaves that we think of in ugly American history when millions of men and women were enslaved and also beaten. We can't really imagine that they actually would be longing for that beating.
Swami?
What's that? The wording is confusing.
Because on one side it says expecting, they come to expect a thrashing, but expecting abuse and wanting it are two very different.
Expecting and wanting are different, right? So expecting the whipping and wanting the whipping are two very different things. And Indrajit was going to say something.
Maybe, when he came here, he had a lot of obstructions, when he was talking, but so he probably meant like, we need obstructions, obstacles to get something, but I don't know why he would say we want it or need it.
And it's the obstructions.
The thrashing or something is thrashing from the nature or something that you want to do, you have a lot of obstructions, obstacles, conflicts that you have to fight through to get to where you want. But still, I'm not sure why you want
But here he's not painting that as a desirable thing. He's saying that this is how those who are slaves. Now we are slaves to our own minds mostly. So.
I think the term was metaphoric.
Yeah, metaphorical.
Metaphorical.
Slaves meaning we are slaves to that.
It's metaphorical, not the actual slaves, but the idea that we want some praise or we want something, we want some reaction. We're not working through freedom. The person who works through freedom does not care for the results, but the slave wants some result. A whipping here, it says, metaphorically. The servant wants his pay. Yes.
Another online comment actually was saying that I guess one's own expectations make one into a slave, being dependent on others' reactions and outer circumstances, which will inevitably vacillate at best, giving one a mental, emotional well-being.
Good. Very nice. Well said. Great. So let's read a little further. This is work through slavery. And to expect a good thrashing now and then becomes their nature. Then there is servants. There you have that expect rather than want. Then there is servants' work. When we require some pay, I give you this and you give me that. Nothing is easier than to say, I work for work's sake, and nothing is so difficult to attain. I will go 20 miles on my hands and knees to look at the face of the man who can work for work's sake. There is a motive somewhere. So he's not saying it's easy, but he's pointing out that can we work through freedom? What a beautiful idea. Work rather than through slavery, rather than through desire for something. Simply work and be unattached. Work through tremendous love, where we taste that love. You see how the yogas come together, how the yogas support each other. How do we cultivate that love? Bhakti yoga is so helpful. The practice of devotion is so helpful for cultivating that love. You had something to say?
So, work for freedom is a little bit more clearer than work for love, because love definition itself is it love for God, is it love for, showing to the other person the love you show, like it's little unclear to me, freedom versus when you say work for love versus.
But he's equating the two. That highest love, which has no expectation of any reward, any return. He is equating. How do we attain that freedom? Through love, through the power of love. See, what does he say?
What I'm saying is, in love there is something to be loved and you love, right? So, but in freedom, there is no second. So I can understand what from a freedom standpoint. But when you say love, I understand it is equating to freedom, but what is the other side? What is being loved?
Well, you could argue that even in freedom there's a sense of something else, because freedom from what?
Freedom from what?
But freedom I can say from everything. So the other side I know is everything. Whereas when you say love, I'm not very sure. Is it God? Is it?
Yes, ultimately it's God, and ultimately that love is God. So, but when we have that tremendous love, then we can love the person we are trying to serve. We can love our co-workers. We can love our bosses. We can love our mothers-in-law. We can love everyone because there's no expectation of return and no fear of a negative return also. That's a life's work. That's when it's connected with that unattachment, which is the freedom.
But how is it not
Sorry.
a negative return because you don't have control over what return you get?
You don't have control over the return you get. So no fear of negative return, no longing for positive return. Simply love is its own reward, actually.
Yeah, previously also when you were talking about knowledge, love, what I was getting is instead of loving the process itself, you're in love with the process, the work,
Love, you're in
rather
love
than
with
an
the
object,
work.
rather than an object or this.
Mm.
Just being in love, doing when you're working or putting action, the process itself is through love.
Yeah.
Your way of working.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I got it.
Mm-hmm. That the Ananda facet of Satchidananda becomes love in the world. It's love without an object in a sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because it is the bliss that is Ananda, which is Satchidananda, which is the divine, which is infinite love, which is all embracing, and so there's no object because everything is contained within it.
Instead of being in love with the process or just moving around.
All right. So Swami Vivekananda will go for 20 miles on his hands and knees to see the face of someone who can really work, who can really attain this state and do work just for work's sake. Now he's going to go on a little description of the motives. We find that why do most people work? There is a motive somewhere. If it is not money, it is power. If it is not power, it is gain. Somehow there is motive power. You are my friend, and I want to work for you and with you. It is all right. Every moment I make protestation of my sincerity. But take care. You have got to agree with me. If you do not, I will no more take care of you or live for you. That sort of work for motive brings misery. Okay. Misery. That work alone brings unattachment and bliss when we work as masters of our own minds. Note that here he equates unattachment and bliss. That detachment itself, unattachment, is equivalent to bliss. When we're completely unattached, the natural bliss of our own being wells up, and we experience that joy. And that bliss he is also equating with love. I know it's a little bit, maybe it's not quite tight and all philosophically perfect, but let's understand, here he's equating freedom and love and bliss and detachment, actually. He's equating all of them in a sense, different aspects of different ways of understanding how to work, how to attain this incredible state when we have no motive for work and yet we continue to work as instruments of the divine, as instruments of divine love, and we work through freedom instead of in slavery. And where is the real slavery? It's the slavery to our own minds. We work as masters of our own minds. That work alone brings unattachment and bliss when we work as masters of our own minds. Now he's going to go on a little rant. Such things as right and justice are very good inside schools and in parlors and all these places. And nowadays also we talk about justice a lot. And we fight for that, we work for that, and Vivekananda himself worked for that. And yet, he says, when you come to deal with the world, right and justice are mere babies' talk. There are two things in this world. First, might. Everyone that is strong, eating up everyone that is weak, from the lowest atom to the biggest, the sun and the moon. might, the power of the strong. I don't think we can deny that. We see it in the world today, all the strife. It's the struggle for power, the struggle of the mighty. And then he says, the other is mercy. Might and mercy. What is heaven? Mercy. If we want to be good, be merciful. Wickedness is there already. Everyone has that everyone that has power wants to take advantage of it. If a person has knowledge, he or she wants to take advantage of that. If he is strong, of that. If a person is physically beautiful, he or she wants to take advantage of that. Everything has to be taken advantage of. That is might. What else is it? Justice and might stand on mercy. What does he mean? Justice and might stand on mercy. Justice we can understand, justice stands on mercy. But even might, he says justice and might stand on mercy. Let's read a little more, see how he explains this. Why do you ask from your children in return for what you have given them? It is your duty to work for them, and there it stops. Whatever you do for a city or a state or a particular person, do it. But is it not silly and unnecessary and foolish to want anything back from babies? If you can incessantly take that position that you are a giver, that everything comes from you as a free offering to the world without any thought of return, that will be work which will not bring attachment. Attachment only comes where we expect something. Okay, so he's again coming back to this point. So how might stands on mercy, we didn't really get a good idea about that. But obviously he's describing someone who is full of mercy, someone who is unattached, who is loving, who is working for the good of the world, just to do it. Take the position of being a giver. This is the idea of mercy. Take the position of being a giver. We have both these sides in us, don't we? We have both these sides in us. Well, on the one hand, we love to give, and what gives us greater joy? Receiving a perfect gift, or finding and giving a perfect gift? Isn't it? If we can find just the right gift for someone, which we can give that gift and see the joy that the person has. Of course, they were getting some reward, joy, but seeing how it's a perfect gift and we can give that. What a joy there is in giving. A greater joy, I would argue, even than receiving a gift. Receiving a perfect gift. Yes, the gift we feel love, and perhaps it's a useful thing that we, but how beautiful it is to give. And in giving the gift, we receive, actually. Giving the gift is itself a gift to us. We receive a tremendous joy of tasting unselfishness, tasting the feeling for others, tasting the joy of expressing love, expressing mercy, and if we can do it without any expectation of return, we actually taste the highest bliss, the bliss of unattachment. Take the position. This is beautiful. If you can incessantly take that position that you are a giver, that everything comes from you as a free offering to the world without any thought of return. How beautiful. This may be a wonderful thought to take with us from today's class. If we can take from today's study, if we can take this thought with us, that we can take that position, incessantly take that position, that we will be givers, that we will not be takers from the world, we will be givers. Everything comes from us as a free offering to the world without any thought of return. That will be work which will not bring attachment. Attachment only comes when we expect something. I was going to give an example. We say we love a woman. We can make it a person. We say we love a person, but we are expecting that he or she will love us in return. If they do not, we know how much pain it brings us. So, all thoughts of return hinder our work, bring attachment, and in the end, bring misery in their train. Swamiji is spending a lot of time hammering on this. I think really to drive it home. The great teachers, they repeat themselves again and again, the words that we really need to hear. Attachment brings misery. He's making it very clear again and again. It is only work that is done as a gift, a free will offering to humanity, to nature, that will not bring attachment with it. And you see, when we can reach this state, where we can attain this, put this attitude into practice fully in our lives, we have attained liberation. Then we are free. We are no longer bound by anything we do. Yet we continue to work, but we're not bound by it. It's beautiful. This is really an amazing section of this class of Swamiji's. That the secret of work. Now we're seeing, yes, the secret of work is non-attachment, but it is also this idea of becoming a giver. It is also this idea of work through love, that love brings that non-attachment. Work through love, work through freedom, work as a giver. So we go from unattachment to work as a master, to work through freedom, work from love, work as a giver. As an offering, a free will offering to humanity, to nature. Or, as he will tell us in the next sentence, there is another idea, to do all this work as worship. If you believe in a personal God, okay, that's the other way. To do all this work as worship, to make it an offering unto the divine. Now, offering a free will offering unto humanity, or a free will offering unto the divine, Swamiji would equate these. Actually, they're not different. They're not that. Where in this world do we see God? We see God shining in all hearts, in all beings, and especially for Vivekananda, the suffering humanity is his God, and he laid down his life to bring people out of suffering. What causes suffering? Ignorance, attachment, bondage, and also, of course, hunger. Not ignorance of our true nature, ultimately, yes, but also ignorance of even the simple things like how to grow crops effectively, how to produce enough food on my farm. That's also ignorance. So Swamiji started the work of the Ramakrishna Mission and enthused hundreds of thousands of people to work for others, work for the uplift of people, work to alleviate suffering. When there's a disaster, when there's a famine, when there's we see people who don't know even how to work, how to make a living. Teach them. Teach. As worship. Work, that reminds me of the old formulation. We start with Karma Yoga, we start with work and worship. We do our worship, and then we do our work, and we hope that at the end of the work we can say, Lord, let me offer this to you as an offering, let me do it as an offering to you. But it's pretty much two things. We are doing work, and then we do worship. And then a higher stage comes when we are able to do the work as worship. And that matures into work is worship. That there's no consciousness that now I'm doing work and now I'm doing worship. The work itself becomes a worship. The work itself becomes an offering when we attain that highest unattachment, that highest love, and everything becomes a free will offering to humanity. It becomes a constant oblations to the Supreme Spirit. Every action is an oblation to the Supreme Spirit. Every word we speak, every stroke of the broom that we sweep, every line of code that we type is an offering to the divine. There is another idea to do all this work as worship, if you believe in a personal God, not to expect anything from humankind, because it is only worshiping God. Give up all fruits of work unto the Lord, who works incessantly. He is never attached. Just as water cannot remain upon the lotus leaf. If you pour water upon the lotus leaf, it all rolls down because it never attached itself to the leaf. I guess he's explaining to his audience who probably never saw a lotus leaf. New Yorkers in 1895 probably never saw a lotus. Have you seen a lotus leaf? Who hasn't seen a lotus leaf? Then you know it's remarkable. Something about the leaf itself. It has some kind of microscopic hairs on it or something. Because if you touch it, you don't feel it. But a drop of water sits on a lotus leaf and it balls up. According to the surface tension, it balls up. It doesn't touch. The leaf itself doesn't get wet. And if you tip the leaf a little, that drop of water rolls right off back into the pond, and it looks like a dry leaf. It's remarkable. Yet, of course, it's full of water. It's growing in the water, and it's drawing the water up, and perhaps that protects it from rotting if it gets, when it's maybe one part of the leaf is hanging in the water of the pond or something. I mean, remarkable. But this is an oft-used example of how to live in the world like a lotus leaf, which is in the water, but never gets wet.
The lotus also is in a very dirty.
In the mud, it grows out of the mud, but it produces this incredibly beautiful blossom. That person is like the lotus leaf, who, even if he or she lives in the midst of the world, will not become attached. So when one has attained to this non-attachment, one may plunge into the battlefield and work on without becoming stained by it. One may go into a crowded city and will not become mixed in sin. One will be as pure as any person who lived all his or her life in the forest. All right, so he's presented this very high ideal of how to work, the secret of work being what? Non-attachment, taking the position of the giver. Now, this is interesting because at this point, and so he says, yes, someone who lived their whole life in the forest and never got mixed in any work and was only living in ashram meditating all day, if we attain this kind of non-attachment, it doesn't matter where we are. We can be in the midst of Los Angeles doing our work, whatever it may be, and we're taking the position of the giver. We are as pure as the sage meditating in the ashram in the forest. Now, here's an interesting little confusion in the text here, because most of the editions of Karma Yoga now have Swamiji telling the story of the mongoose with half its god body golden. And this Sturgis edition has put that at the end of each is great in his own place. But it seems likely that it actually was given in this talk. We're not entirely sure, but because this story of the mongoose turning gold describes the supreme self-sacrifice of a family. And therefore, I'm scrolling back to the a page where this story is given. And it's there's not much to explain. I think I'd like to read it today because that will conclude our study of this particular class of Swamiji's The Secret of Work. So I'm going to read a little bit more probably and see if we can read the whole story and see how it paints this picture of the utter self-sacrifice without any there's no taker here. There's only being a giver. After the battle of Kurukshetra, after the great Mahabharata war, the 5 Pandu brothers held a great sacrifice and made very large gifts to the poor. All the people expressed amazement at the greatness and richness of the sacrifice, and said that such a sacrifice the world had never seen before. But after the ceremony, there came a little mongoose. Half its body was golden, and the other half was brown. And he began to roll himself on the floor of the sacrificial hall. Then he said to those around, "You are all liars. This is no sacrifice." "What?" they exclaimed. "You say this is no sacrifice? Do you not know how money and jewels were poured out upon the poor, and everyone became rich and happy? This was the most wonderful sacrifice any man ever made." But the mongoose said, "There was once a little village, and in it there dwelt a poor Brahmin with his wife, his son, and his son's wife. They were very poor, and lived on alms gained in preaching and teaching, for which men made little gifts to them. There came in that land a 3 years' famine, and the poor Brahmin suffered more than ever. At last, for 5 days the family starved, but on the 5th day the father brought home a little barley flour, which he had been fortunate enough to find, and he divided it into 4 parts, one for each of them. They prepared it for their meal, and just as they were about to eat it, a knock came at the door. The father opened it, and there stood a guest. Now, in India, a guest is sacred. The guest is as God for the time being, and must be treated as such. This goes back to the Upanishads. Atithi devo bhava, matri devo bhava, pitri devo bhava, acharya devo bhava, atithi devo bhava. Let see your mother as God, see your father as God, see your teacher as God, see the guest, particularly the atithi means the unexpected guest, not someone you've invited. You've invited a guest, that's one thing. This means the uninvited guest who shows up. The person who shows up hungry at your door is God. Say the Upanishads says this tradition in India. So the poor Brahmin said, "Come in, sir, you are welcome." He set before the guest his own portion of food, and the latter quickly ate it up and then said, "Oh, sir, you have killed me. I have been starving for 10 days, and this little bit has but increased my hunger." Then the wife said to her husband, "Give him my share." But the husband said, "Not so." The wife, however, insisted, saying, "Here is a poor man, and it is our duty as householders to see that he is fed. And it is my duty as a wife to give him my portion, seeing that you have no more to offer him." Then she gave her share to the guest, and he ate it up, and said he was still burning with hunger. So the son said, "Take my portion also." It is the duty of the son to help his father fulfill his obligations. The guest ate that, but remained still unsatisfied. So the son's wife gave him her portion also. That was sufficient, and the guest departed, blessing them. That night, those 4 people died of starvation. A few grains of that flour had fallen on the floor, and when I rolled my body on them, half of it became golden, as you see it. Since then, I have been all over the world, hoping to find another sacrifice like that, but never have I found one. Nowhere else has the other half of my body been turned into gold. That is why I say this is no sacrifice. So it's kind of a shocking story, isn't it? The family gave up their small, meager portion. They'd been starving for 5 days, and the guest comes, and he's been starving for 10 days. So they all give up their meager portions and satisfy the hunger of the guest, and they give up their bodies, all of them. So that is taking the position of a giver, taking it to that highest extent, that very highest extent. We had a brother in the monastery where I joined in Chibuco, Eddie Asibo. He had been a novice for some time, and then he left the monastery and he had a family and all that, but he came back and retired at the monastery. And I remember he told me a story about Mexico. He was from Mexico, and he lived in Mexico for many years. And at some point, he was living on a farm, and they were hungry. They didn't have much food, and they somehow got a meal, and they were poor. And somebody else came along, and all the Mexicans were like, "Oh yeah, come on, we'll share what we have." And there was one American guy among them, and he was like, "Wait, what are you doing? No, we don't have enough." And he told how angry he became that this tradition, at least among the poor Mexicans, was you share what you have, and if somebody else shows up who's hungry, all right, we're all going to eat a little less, but we share what we have. That tradition, and the American tradition was, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat it. Who's this guy? So this was I think the poor people all over the world have this attitude of sharing, and it's the wealthy people who have this attitude of being takers. It's not, oh, I might share a little bit as long as I have enough, but if I don't have enough, I'm not going to share it. So it's a very high ideal. It seems like a high ideal to us, but it's the we find among poor people all over the world, they have this ideal. Maybe not giving up entirely. This is taken into another level where they give up entirely their food and they die of starvation feeding the guests. At least we share what we have equally. As Swamiji points out, this idea of charity is going out of India. Grand people are becoming fewer and fewer. When I was first learning English, I read an English storybook where the first story was about a dutiful boy who had gone out to work and had given some of his money to his old mother. And this was praised in 3 or 4 pages. What was that? No Hindu boy could ever understand that story. Now I understand. It took Swamiji coming to America to understand the story of how we praise a young English boy for giving his mother some of the money he earned. Now I understand when I hear the Western idea, every man for himself, every woman for herself. And some men take everything, and fathers and mothers and wives and children go to the wall. That should not be the idea of the household. Now you see what karma yoga means, even at the point of death, to help anyone without asking any questions. Be cheated millions of times and never ask a question, and never think of what you are doing. Never vaunt of your gifts to the poor or expect their gratitude, but rather be grateful to them for giving you the occasion of practicing charity on them. So this is this closing teaching here. And then this last sentence, thus it is plain that to be an ideal householder is a much more difficult task than to be an ideal sannyasi. That, I think, belongs to the each is great in his own place class. But still, it's a good point. Actually, to be an ideal householder is more difficult than to be an ideal monk. We've covered the hour. I should welcome any brief comments or questions.
There is a question. The modern human mind, which has rationalized attachment and the following misery as a part and parcel of life and a very normal thing, how can you canvas for unattachment to such a mind?
How can you do what?
Canvas?
Canvas?
Yeah.
Let me see if I can find it.
I guess suggest, I don't know what.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Living in an unattached manner in this world opens up the door of inner joy, whereas being attached to something or somebody invariably culminates in misery. But the modern human mind, which has rationalized attachment and the following misery as a part and parcel of life and a very normal thing, how can you canvas for unattachment to such a mind Well, yeah, we can only work on our own minds. The other people, are you saying your own mind is stuck there? Maybe he's saying that his own mind is stuck there in rationalized attachment and following misery as a part and parcel of life. Well, we imbibe, we drink in these teachings, we think about these teachings, we live them, we start to practice them. Uh, yes, practice this, think about what Swamiji has told us today. Unattachment brings joy, the joy of being a giver. Take the position of being a giver. Release the attachment. Recognize that the attachment brings misery. Attachment binds us when that longing for liberation comes. That, I think it finally boils down to, do we want freedom? How much do we want freedom? And do we want just freedom from one thing or two things? Do we want the highest freedom? When we recognize that I'm hungry, I can attain freedom from hunger by eating a meal, but I'll be hungry again. The only way to attain freedom from all want, from all craving, is to know who we are, to know the divine, to find that infinite source of bliss, which is our true nature, lying deep within us.
Two more questions.
Two more questions. What is your one bit of advice regarding karma yoga based on your experience of doing it? My experience of doing it, well, we all try to do it. We're only trying to do karma yoga to actually to be completely unattached. I would, based on my own experience, meditation is an essential part of karma yoga for me. In the morning, to attain a certain peace of mind, a certain, a certain focus of the mind which comes through meditation, a certain peace and focus, and then working becomes easy. Because it's easy to, because that current of the mind, that current which has been established flowing towards the divine is easier to maintain. Without that practice of meditation, starting the day with meditation, it's very, very difficult. That's my own experience. And there's a question which is not really about karma yoga. Why did Swamiji doubt the divinity of Sri Ramakrishna as Sri Ramakrishna was about to pass away? Well, Swamiji was always one. So that's why we love Swami Vivekananda so much. He wasn't going to accept anything without direct proof. So he's like we also are doubters. Vivekananda also was a doubter until he verified through his own experience that the teachings of the scriptures are true. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share this study of Swami Vivekananda's really thrilling teachings here. And let's take a moment, shall we? Just a moment of reflection. I myself am going to remember that beautiful idea. Let us take the position of being a giver. cake ourselves, we're giving it to somebody else. They get the pleasure, but we get the joy. And they're different. And that's a fundamental misunderstanding, a fundamental mistake we tend to make. We conflate